Hi, welcome back. This is part 3 of event advertising, and in this tutorial video we will be putting text into your design. So one of the first things that we need to do is create the information about the date. So don't forget that this information needs to get in here, and there's a few different ways of doing that. So you need to have the date and the location. Just in case people are coming from other areas, we need that information. We also will need contact information at the bottom. So one of the great things that I like to do for the contact information at the bottom is creating a box, and I'm just using the rectangle tool. Create a box down at the bottom and make sure it goes over the bleed area. And then if you have your Swatches palette open, you can pick a color. Now if you don't have a specific color that you want, there's some of these are pretty bright and pretty strong, so but go ahead and go to the new color swatches and pick a specific color. So you can go in here and pick a darker, maybe a more burgundy type red. Now burgundy, you'd have a little bit more blue in it, maybe not as much black, but a little bit more blue. Maybe it would have more yellow, maybe it would have less yellow, but if you want to make it a little darker, you can do that. And just pick a color. You can go ahead, it saves the CMYK settings, and you'll see it up in here, so you can save it like that, but it puts it down the bottom. If you create a spot color, you can name the spot color and create it that way using the CMYK colors too. But down here we also need, before we do this part, I was going to go ahead and do the contact information. So we'll go ahead and put in a text box down here, and it'll say call for more information, and then we'll just put in a fictitious phone number, and we'll because that's on a dark background, the type should be white, so make sure you have type selected here and white. And then I would make this a lot larger, and if we want to use a different type font, we can. Let's see, we're using Minion Pro for this. We can stick with, that's a default setting for the Mac computers, so we can stick with that for now. And you can see call for more information. And of course sometimes I use initial caps, and if you do it, be consistent, or you know, keep it all lowercase, just keep the initial letter uppercase, and you can do that, or you know, maybe that would be caps. Okay, so we have that information on here. Make sure that you have it centered, and then we're going to center it on that block, and you can take a look at it. Let's go ahead and zoom out. You can get a pretty good idea what that looks like. So we're missing this information for the actual balloon festival, the date and location. So another thing that you can do, you can stretch this across the top just below the name, or you can put it in a band across here. So I'll go ahead and we'll go ahead and stretch this across right now. I'm going to backspace on this, and then I'll put a space, and then on Macintosh a bullet is option 8. To add bullets for Windows computer, it's Control-Shift-L. And I'll just say, instead of at, I'll just take, it'll just say Ed Brabson Balloon Festival, and then I need to backspace on here, and I'll put in a space, and then option 8 for the bullet. Okay, and so what's happening is it's trying to fill that text box. So in order to make this spread out, you need to make the text box bigger. And usually, like what I was saying, I usually do is I'll make it the width of the actual margins. That way I know it fits within there, and I'll go ahead and do the Command-Shift-C for center. Make the type a little bit bigger, and that could be a sans serif type font, it could be this type font. It's up to you what you want to make that. So there's a couple different ways of putting in a color band. I could put type over a color band like we did for the call for, or you can go ahead and fill the type box with color. So if I go to the fill and not to the type, just go to the fill color, and I'll fill it with a color. You can see the band fills, but the So what happens is the type gets too close to the text box and creates too much tension. So we don't want to do that. And it also, the type should be white on this if we do it this way, just like we did on the bottom. Okay, and what I would do is, first of all, I'll go ahead and change the type to white. Okay, and then the way we do this is to center this within that text box is going under Object, Text Frame Options, right there. And if you go in there, you can pull this off to the side and you can see exactly what you're doing. So we're resetting the inset spacing, and what I'll do is I'll just set it like that, and you'll see these little inset bands or outline margin that goes in there, and if you want it to be more, you can set it even more. So if you get it to be too much, it'll go outside that space. It won't be able to fit in there, and you have to expand this box to make it fit. So be careful about that if that happens. It's probably, if you see your text disappear, it means that your box for your text is not large enough. So in this case, if we want this to go across like that, we would, I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, we want this to go all the way across probably so it bleeds off the page, and I'll show you why in a second. We'll just do the preview, W preview, and you can see now I made the box too small. You can see what happened. Accidentally made it too big or too small, and there it is. So you can make the type smaller. You can stretch it out if you want to. You know, if you want to go ahead and go to tracking, you can go to tracking and make the type spread out a little bit more if you want to. It's not necessary to do that on this, but I'll leave it at 10 for tracking. You can make the type a little smaller if you want to. And you can make, if you make the type smaller, you can actually make the text box smaller too. So more like that. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll actually use lines, or you can, on the text box or on the box itself, you can use, not on the text, but on the text box, you can put a stroke in. So if you want a stroke, I'll just put black for now, and you can see it on here. When you look at it in the layout mode, you'll see it go all the way to the edge, but because it's getting cut off, you won't see it at all on the preview version. So on this, you know, maybe I want it to be black, maybe I want it to be white. White looks pretty good, and then you can actually expand that width, thickness of the stroke, and then that's going to affect the size of the box. So I may want to change the margin on this in the inset, so I go to text frame options and maybe reduce this down just a little bit. And this should be locked, so it should be consistent all the way through. And it changed. You can unlock this and just do adjust the inset for the top and the bottom, or the left and the right independently, but this is, has the lock on it right now, so the keychain lock. If you unlock it, it looks like that. Okay, and then you'll see, because of the box size, it doesn't look like it fits properly, but if you can still double click on this, and of course it's making the width resize too. So you probably don't want to do it on this because of the fact that we want that line to go off the edge of the page, and you can see it that way. Zoom in a little bit and you can see fits pretty good. This could go a little bit smaller. There we go. And so the space here and the space here, we want that to be independent, or equal and even. So you can get a pretty good idea what's going on this. That's good. We can add a drop shadow. Drop shadows don't really work well on black type, but if we do white type, which we will on another layout, we'll do that. We're missing the text now, so let's go ahead and do the text. Now we may not have enough space for it, but let's go ahead and make this box a little smaller. We have the contact information. Let's see if we can get the text to fit in here properly. I'll go to the layout mode. And we have the text, so the text is fairly big, and I think it's set to 12 point. So you don't want to go any smaller than 10 point for your text. Makes it hard to read anything smaller than 10 point, so that's the smallest you want to go. So if we go to 10 point, we put it down here, it's not going to fit very well in one column like that. If we stretch it across, Now you can do this, but it's a rule of thumb for graphic design is not to expand your type all the way across with one column to go all the way across like this, because it's hard to read and go down. You come all the way in, then you have to go all the way over. So if you spread things out more than 3/4 of the size of your layout width, you want to use 2 columns. So what I would do is I would reduce this down to another to 1 column, and then go to the outbox here and then click and drag another column. So we want to make sure those columns are the same size as well, and there's no easy way that I know of to do this except to go ahead and drag them over each other to make sure that they're the same. We can do columns, but what happens with columns, it'll set columns for the whole layout, and it's not worth all the work and time that's involved in doing that. So I don't typically do that. But here's your basic layout for your type, and it's getting a little tight, and then it's missing, you know, a line on this side, so it looks okay, but it doesn't look that great. We can play with that a little bit by expanding, either expanding the type column like that and expand it over here, and then I don't think we can get it this way because it'll expand over here, so we might have to do something else with it. So for now I'm going to leave it like that. The other part of this is we need some more space, so I'm going to go ahead and select the photo. So what happened is I select the background. This is another issue that you need to run into, or that you will run into, is that the your layers. So in your layers right now, I have everything in one layer, and that's a problem. So in InDesign, you need to break things into independent layers. So typically what I do is I'll create a separate layer just by clicking on the new layer down here, and I'll call this background, and I'll move everything to that background for the background graphics. So for this, that's the background graphics. That way I can lock it. Now when I do this, it's up above the first layer, which I could have done this on the bottom layer and moved everything up, but I'll show you how this works. I'm going to go ahead and go to Edit, Cut, and it gets rid of the background. Then I go to the background layer, and then I go ahead and paste it into the background layer. So I'll just go ahead and say paste in place. Now it's in the background layer, and I'll pull the background layer below the graphics layer, and that way it's there, but I can lock it. And now if I go to select things, I won't select that layer. So now I can select the photos independently and move those up slightly to give my text more space. And the same thing with the text, I want to keep that on a separate layer too. So basically I want to create another layer. This is going to be, this could be the photos layer or graphics layer. I'll just call this, I can say graphics and photos. And then I'm going to take all the other things and put them in another layer. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to call this text. So you can double click on it and just name it. You can also double click on it and change the color of the highlight that it uses, and you'll see the colors on here. You can change that if you want. There's a whole group of different colors that you can choose from. That helps sometimes to make it easier to find your files. So now I'll select the text holding the shift key down, and I'll select this band too because that's text. You could even put the logo in there if you want to, and I'll select these and this, and I'll Command X or cut, and then I'll go to type or text, and then paste in place. So I'll go use the menu version of that. Okay, and now you can see I have all the text on one, the graphics is in another, and then I have the background. So that way I can keep the background locked and work with my other graphics. Okay, so let's get rid of that. We don't really need that. And you can see, so the other thing I want to do to this layout too, you can see I don't have this, for some reason it's showing up completely off to the side, so I'm not really sure Let's see, I need to pull that out a little bit more so the lines are cut off, and I'm not looking at the preview version of it, but you get the idea in there. So I can change those lines too. So this is the layout version. In the layout version, I want to actually add a drop shadow to these photos, and that will help make this kind of pop out. So if I go to select all 3 photos, go to Object, Effects, Drop Shadow, you can go into Drop Shadow, and as you do it, you'll see it right away. Now, typically the drop shadow on here, the default setting is always bigger than you want to. You can do all these other things: inner shadow, outer shadow, inner glow, bevel and emboss, satin, finish, basic feather, directional feather, that's feathering the edge, making things soft edge, gradient feather, and so on. But for the offset, I always change this and change the 9 to a 3, and it gives it more of a better distance for the X coordinate and the Y coordinate offset, and you can hit preview and see how nice and tight that is. That's going to be a lot tighter. And you can also lower the opacity. This opacity looks fine, so I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And you can see on this, it helps pop the images out. So one of the other things that I want to do on this is we'll move the text around a little bit. So you can't create evenly spaced columns if you have one full column across, and then you can go to the align settings for columns to make this change. What I want to do is I'm going to expand this out, the text out, and then it takes up one box only, and I'm going to get rid of this other column that I created, and then I'm going to expand this out. Now, one of the features of InDesign that's really great, let's go ahead and center this, okay, is that if you look in your properties, if you go all the way, scroll down to the bottom, you'll have a line set up here. So align, you can align text frames. So what I can do is I can set up columns. I can do 2, 3 columns, and that way you can also adjust the gutter in here, so you can make it bigger or smaller and expand it out like that if you want to. There's other options too, so you could make it 3 columns. I would rather have 2 columns though, and make it it's a little bit easier to read, but if you feel like 3 columns could work, that might be okay. But let's take a look and see. So it evens out fairly well, but you have a little extra space here. So maybe if we make this a little smaller, let's see what happens. One of the other things you need to do when you do this is to set your text so there's no hyphenation. So if you go into paragraph, right here in the paragraph panel, right down here where it says hyphenation, click on hyphenation, and it'll get rid of all the hyphenation in your document of text, and then you can see what it looks like. So it doesn't look that bad. It has a little bit more space here, but you can either do it this way, or you can go and change it. If you want to change it to two columns, you can do that too. So whichever looks good. I'm going to leave it at 3 because we have the 3 graphics here, and I may just go ahead and move these up also. So I'm going to select those and move those up a little bit. I didn't want to cover some things up in here, but there is a picture of a truck here that's not that really exciting. So, but that looks a little bit better, and then you can see from page layout purposes, you can look at this and see that. So that looks good. Done. So that's all we're going to do for part 3, and we'll come back on part 4 and we'll start creating some more graphic layouts for pages 2 and 3.